everything done, and secretarial work and everything else dealing with them, I guess, my thoughts are staff can do this work, staff can still communicate, and the groups can still communicate with their counselors, but it can go back here and move forward faster. Working groups can be established, but for this season, I don't know that we have time to set up those working
That was
groups.
actually the second point to my question I didn't get to, but that's okay. Yeah, the second point in the question was, are any of these expenditures reflected right now in our proposed operating budget?
No, none of the new changes are. So the current operating budget reflects the current program.
Okay.
So if there's any changes to be made that have financial impacts, that would be in addition to the current draft budget.
Yeah, I guess that's the concern I have, is that there are some really big considerations in here, and I don't know if tonight is, the night to get into this. I think this needs really good discussion at the budget meeting on its own, and we've got to really look at this and think about it. And I looked at it today, and I don't know. I don't have any answers. I don't have, it's contingent on resources.
Councillor Scott. Councillor Scott.
The report is an amazing report. Brent, you did a great job. I mean, I sat and read it. I gave it to my husband to read because he likes this type of thing, and he was like, wow. So we've done something, but there are two things that I'm very concerned about. One, if we don't do something about putting a working group together now, we'll be in the same boat we were with the Economic Development Task Force. And that's 6 months down the road, we'll still be talking about it. So I don't believe that necessarily a working group can do a lot for 2013, perhaps, but I also believe that a working group has to start thinking ahead for 2014, or we're going to be in the same boat come next January. So I think a working group is actually a priority. It doesn't necessarily solve the solution for 2013, but it does start to put together some people in place that we can start to look at. Maybe some partnerships will come out of this. If we don't get a bunch of groups together for people to understand how the costs of each of these things are going to be. I mean, the ice management study, I think, was $1.4 million, and there's no guarantees that that works. This is different because this is the summer uses of this stuff. So we're looking at two different things already with it. So I think we have to put together the concept of a working group now, and I think we need to then have a Tuesday discussion where we spend nothing talking about this before we finalize our budget on what we can be willing to spend or not spend, because this is either we're going to do it or we're going to ignore it. And then when we ignore it, we end up having people come forward to us and say to us, but you're doing this and this, there's no tourism, da-da-da-da. We won't have a boat on the river if we don't do something and soon. I've already had operators calling to ask me what the potential problem or what the potential is for this year. Can they rent their docks out? I mean, is there any point? So I have people already calling me and asking that, and this is January, so they're obviously getting that. I think we need to go back to maybe where John and I were put on a committee with Brent, and maybe we need to sit down with Brent and talk about some of the stuff that you've put in here, and then talk about a working group, what it is that you need from a working group, start on that part of it at least, and then come back to council with what a working group, what we need to do with it, and we could do that in the next thing. But if we ignore this, or we don't do something positive with this now, we're going to be in the same boat we are next year discussing the same thing. It's like dogs running on the beach. We hear that all the time. We can't find a solution. But if we don't start to look for a solution, we're not ever going to have a chance to have one.
I'm not suggesting that we don't do anything with this. I'm suggesting that council move forward and either update the contract to have the piece of equipment to do what needs to be done this year. But the other part of that is the working group looking at the long-term development and redevelopment, whether it be a safe harbor in Grand Bend that is recognized, or whether there's additions to both marinas. That's the thing I see with the working group. I see the local, this year, solutions being staff. What do we need to do to keep this operation going, and to put that in place through a council decision, which will be much quicker. If the working group is formed, it needs to be a long-term, or it needs to be the terms of reference need to be defined, whether it's a working group for a 5-year plan. That part of it. Councillor Underwood.
Yeah, I have two things. One is for the report exactly known as towards the working group or groups. Councillor Russell, we'll start with the working group. Councillor Russell mentioned 2 different groups. Maybe would that be the best way through you to Brent? Would you prefer to have 2 separate working groups, or would you like to make this into one omnibus solution, get experts who are all voters from both areas, like in one working group, what would be the most effective? In my mind, it would be have one working group with representatives from both, because then you can come up with a plan for the whole, for both boards, right?
I guess my thought on that is, one group might be a good idea, because maybe somebody from Port Franks has an interesting idea about Grand Bend that we haven't looked at, because, you know, when we look at Grand Bend, all we see is Grand Bend. I think one group could probably do this, and we could, as long as we share and get along, we'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah. And the other one is, okay, I was reading here that for us to be viable port either at both locations, we need a 5-foot draw. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly?
No, the point of the 5-foot draft is, if we want to use the north side to maintain channel depths in Port Franks, we need 5 feet.
So we're landlocked right now with the north side in Port Franks.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Okay, that's not very good, is it? But, so we're looking for, what kind of draft do we need to have a viable port for? What are we looking at here? Just power boats or sail? So we need a.
Or if we other for Councilor McGuire, he's.
For the mouth of the river, you want at least 6-7 feet, because you have the hydraulic, the waves in the trough of the crest,
Right.
so if the boat's coming in and
It's
storing.
going, choppy water, you're gonna.
Yeah,
run
you
out.
want the extra, yeah.
What are we at now? What were we at the end of last season? Let's go.
3 feet.
3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so when we're talking dredging, we're talking thousands and thousands of tons of silt that has to be pulled out of it, right? So for spot dredging, would spot dredging take care of it?
Well, no, spot, because it's a regular maintenance item that we have to do, could have to do on a weekly basis. We use a prop washing method to keep the channel clear,
Yeah.
and that's where my Thai works has come forward with having purchased a new vessel, and it's, you know, expressed an interest in the Atlantic Shores, asking us if we'd like to look at it as a method to keep that channel deeper and clearer. And the advantage of that vessel is it can operate in a very low water condition.
Well, if we're looking for any kind of recommendation tonight, I'm looking towards that recommendation. I know it's a little bit more expensive at the beginning, but I think it's important to try and catch up at least. If water levels do drop substantially over the next few years, at that point, I think the council, or maybe not this one, or the future councils, gonna have to look at the possibility of when are we gonna cut our losses, or are we gonna be dredging out miles? Because eventually, the basin, the lake basin, is gonna catch up to where the port is, right? So,
Yeah.
hopefully that won't be for another, well, it's going down very quickly, right? So,
Any dredging, we have to make sure that we don't undermine
the walls.
the walls
Yeah.
and how that happens, so we have to take that into consideration. Proposal with the new operation or the new boat that's been purchased or dredger that's been purchased is an option for us, and I guess we decided whether we're going to be open for business this year. And I believe it's the only option that we have if we're gonna carry on with both harbors and keeping them open. So, Dr. Mayor, did I get her hand up?
So I have a few questions for you to Brent, if I could. Brent, it makes comment in your report that for the Grand Bend Harbor, the 50% of the cost to maintain the depths are grant funded through federal government. And yet it's sitting at a $17,000 annual payment right now. So is that keeping up with the costs? Or is there any way for us to increase that $17,000 so that that's another source of monies for us?
The way the DFO grant works is they look at the current contract that my co works. It's 50-50 split between Grand Bend and Port Franks. The cost is fixed, so we know what we're going to pay every year, and DFO is committed to spending 50% of that.
Of only Grand Bands or Port Franks and Grand
Only
Bands?
Grand Bands.
Only Grand Bands, so it's about a quarter of the actual cost of the
Yes.
contract ultimately. Okay, I understand. The other thing is if and when we are able to do some dredging, obviously it'll be very important that we are diligent in maintaining that, keeping it open, because it can fill in very easily. So it will be important for us to have the north side or some other arrangement